Hey folks, this week Randal joins me and we talk with Allen Firstenberg about Google's AI, open source AI in general, vibe coding, and lots more. You don't want to miss it. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 830, recorded Tuesday, April the 22nd. Vibes. It's time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today it's all about the vibes, man. Speaking of vibes, I've got a wonderful and talented co-host, the wonderful Mr. Randal Schwartz. That is the wrong.
Where do you have
that button? Not to bury the lead. Not to bury the lead, but there we go. Randal, welcome.
Yeah, hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me back. This is a lot of fun being able to not produce FLOSS Weekly.
Yes.
As you know, I did that for 13 years.
Yes.
So I'm very happy to just be the occasional drop-in co-host and guest. I think it's a lot more fun this way.
It is a blast.
I kind of miss the show a bit, but I've got my own weekly show that I do for 2 hours anyway. So I don't miss the fact that there is a routine in my week always as a result of something.
Yes.
But I'm sure FLOSS Weekly, I'm glad I did those 13 years. Happy that you're doing it now. So thank you for taking up the reins. Definitely.
Yeah, one of these days we'll have you and Doc on the same show. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'll be fun. We'll do it. So I put the call out a couple of days ago and I said, I've been scheduling guests. I've got like 3 invitations out, but nobody's committed for this Tuesday. What can we do? And Randall's like, I've been vibe coding. And I'm like, oh, I hate it. That's great. Let's talk about it. And then Randal says, oh, by the way, there's this guy over at Google that is doing some of their AI stuff, Allen Firstenberg. We'll see if I got that right. And so it is not just the two of us talking about vibe coding. We've actually got the 3 of us now talking about stuff going on that Google is doing with AI. Allen has, I believe it's an AI/LLM directional open source project that we're going to talk about as well. But let's go ahead, let's bring him on, and let's the 3 of us sort of dive into this. And it's an episode today it's all about the vibes. Alan,
hey there, great to be on.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So where do you fit into all of this? What is your project? What do you do at Google? What's your feeling about the vibes?
So let's be clear about a couple of things first. Yes. I don't work for Google.
Okay.
I work for a small consulting company called Objective Consulting at spiders.com. But like Randal, I'm what Google refers to as a Google developer expert. Mm-hmm. So we are a bunch of little over 1,000 outside developers that work closely with Google. Mm-hmm. So we don't work for them. My paycheck doesn't come from them. But we work closely both with Google's engineers, Google's developer relations team, and with developers to kind of help make that bridge between the two organizations, the two sets of people.
Sure.
Help developers understand what it is that Google can offer and help Google understand where they are falling short and need to help developers more.
Got it. And so do you work with Flutter like Randal does, or do you work with other Google stuff?
I do not. Randal and I, it feels like we've known each other for years at this point, but we work in very, very different domains. A lot of the work that I do tends to be more on the server side of things. Historically, I've worked with Google Glass. Historically, I've worked with Google Assistant, neither of which had any Flutter components at all, really. These days, I'm mostly doing work with their AI product, with Gemini, with Gemma, and in their cloud-based resources. Mm-hmm. So that's where you see most of my focus these days.
See, I noticed you mentioned Google Glass. You are wearing a Google Glass headset, aren't you?
Yes, this is one of the classic 12-year-old versions of Google Glass at this point. Wow. I like to put it on every so often to kind of remind me where the focus needs to be sometimes, what that really ultra personal computing platform can be like. And because I feel like there are some people out there that wouldn't recognize me if I didn't wear it.
It's a reminder to me of the future that might have been.
Still will be. I still feel like it still will be.
Yeah, maybe. If it ever gets to be lightweight enough and comfortable enough and and easily interacts with me at
Right.
some level. I'm sure those are the big, how do you handle the UX on something like that?
The thing
I think
that-
the UX is always critical. And
Right.
we could sidetrack and go on that for an hour or so, but that's way outside of FLOSS type discussions at this point.
I think there is actually an interesting tie together there, because one of the things that really sort of doomed Google Glass back in the days is that people hated it. Not the people that used it. The people that used it liked it. But everybody else that had to be around them, I'm sure you remember the term that was coined
Yes.
for those that wore Google Glass. Other people hated it. And I never really quite understood why. Maybe it was the thought that, we're always being recorded, which I don't think is quite true. But it was just weird that people had it was almost a visceral reaction to it.
There was that. I tend to maintain that the biggest reason why Glass never got the adoption that it did was because of the Google bus system that was being set up at the time, 12 years ago. So it created this very negative attitude around Google in the Bay Area, where all of the tech reporters were. So the tech reporters had this narrative about, well, Google's evil, and Glass kind of got carried on with that.
If somebody was
Every
wearing
person-
Google Glass, you automatically knew, oh, look, it's a Googler or somebody Google aligned.
Right. Every person that I ever spoke with about Glass itself was always thrilled with it. They always, once I explained to them after a couple of minutes what the UX was like and how it was not invading in their privacy and how Google was very careful about doing that. They got it and they were excited about it. And I think we're now seeing that as we're seeing more and more head-mounted wearable platforms actually coming to market now.
So this idea of people being annoyed and offended by a product without really understanding what it's for, it seems like maybe there are some parallels between that and the AI/LLM craze that we're in and what Google is doing with Gemini. Is that too much of a stretch?
Good segue.
Nice.
So tell us.
If I can jump in here just for a second,
Yeah.
I want to sort of also bring context in as to why I immediately thought of Allen to come on today's show. Is that right now, at least in the Flutter and Angular world, we are going through about a 3 or 4 week push to talk more and more about how Gemini can be used in products, and Gemma can be used in products, and just AI in general can be used in products. The relationship to open source, of course, is that many of those products are open source. So it's kind of fun to be able to talk about that and how you can share your code. But then what does the recipient need if he wants to plug in, because he's going to need a key, he's going to need a Firebase account, things like that. And so there's this push, and then there's also the push that's sort of happening in general. And the timing of this is because we're between Next and I/O, and a few things happened at Next, and I think Allen can probably explain a little better than me about what happened at Next. And we sort of anticipate some things that are going to happen at I/O. Of course, we don't know. We kind of know, but we don't know.
Officially know.
You know something, Randall?
I can't say. I'm under NDA.
As Randall and I
about is what we've been promoting.
Yeah.
As Randall and I both like to say, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know.
Right. So we have to be a little careful. So what happened? What happened at Next, and what's happening in the Gemini world? It's so rapid. It's so hard for me to keep up even with it all. Why don't you give us a summary of sort of what's recent, what's sort of anticipated, and where are we going with this, and why is it important to people to know about this AI stuff?
So I think the big buzzword of this year is agents and agentic. Everything is agentic these days. We're seeing lots and lots of agents. The big announcements at Next were all around this. Google announced what they refer to as their agent development kit, which was a software package, an open source library for Python that helped people develop agents. This is similar to a lot of similar agentic tool sets that you're seeing both from other companies like Microsoft and from startups like LangChain. And it's LangChain's products that I tend to work with the most. I help them a lot with their open source adaptations for Gemini. So that's where where I come from mostly in a lot of open source stuff these days.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of, the big hotness is, how do we build agents? How do we maintain agents? How do we get agents so that everyone can connect to everybody else's agents? And Google released an open protocol called the agent-to-agent protocol at Next. And it complements something that is currently the big hotness in the AI space called the Model Control Protocol, Model MCP. Where
I'm having flashbacks to Tron, man.
I tell you, I'm trying to
Tron.
Yes. I've been trying to figure out for a while if that was intentional or not, and if it was intentional, why? But it was very much their way of trying to create a standard way that people could build servers that an individual who is writing an agent or using an AI system can attach to these servers and have it do things on their behalf. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of discussion about it, a lot of discussion about how this is a great thing. There are some gaps in the protocol, at least in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But one of the great things that it allows people to do is just kind of give these nice open-ended questions to their personal agent and say, go figure out how to get the data that I just asked you about, or do what I just asked you about. Find the MCP servers that are out there and take advantage of them. So
when you use the term agent, I've heard that with AI. I couldn't give you a definition for that. What exactly do we mean when we're talking about an AI agent?
Well, I could give you my definition and my perspective, and sure. I'm sure Randal could give you his, and I'm sure if you invited two other people on the show, they'd give you theirs, and they would all be slightly different. The way I like to think about agents at this point is that we aren't so much giving our AI systems, I guess when I think about it, when we think of how we have traditionally developed software, mm-hmm. we are giving it very, very rigid rules, rigid mathematical rules. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about agents, we're giving them more broad rules and sets of tools to use. And it is the AI system that is determining how do we take those instructions that a user has given it, and how do we apply these tools to achieve the outcome? So whereas before we might say, okay, here is the structured input that we need. Here are the algorithms that we will use. Here are the function calls that we will make. Here are the libraries that we will invoke to get a particular set, to get a particular output. Mm-hmm. Instead, with an agent, we're saying, a user may say something. Here are the tools that you have at your command. You figure out how to invoke those tools to execute what they want you to do. And it's the agent that is kind of the controlling system in there. It's the one that will work with the AI, that communicates the instructions to the AI. It goes, if the AI has said that it needs to invoke a tool, the agent is the one that actually invokes the tool, possibly with the user's additional permissions, possibly with other context or information that may be necessary, and sends the results back to the AI to determine what the next step is. So rather than have the determinism be in the code that we have written, the determinism is now in the AI system, and the agent is just a master controller.
Who's kind of
and can I fill in the background
please.
A little bit too? I just want to say how we got here was pretty interesting because mm-hmm. originally the LLMs were just big autocomplete machines. They would you would say something and they would say something back, and you'd say something to them and they'd mm-hmm. say something back again until you're building this long context of whatever it is you were covering on. Then somebody got the clever idea of, hey, if the LLM says something of a particular shape, like Wikipedia and an item, tell it that if it says that, then I will go look up that Wikipedia item and give it the contents of the top part of the page. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now that becomes part of its, I don't want to use the word thinking, but part of its way of of auto-completing is like, oh, it needs some Wikipedia information. It now knows if it says Wikipedia Randall Schwartz, then I'm going to, as my next chat item, say, here's the Wikipedia answer for Randall Schwartz. And it can then continue its auto-completion further and further with that. So this was the beginning of tools. And tools had sort of a really fuzzy protocol to start with. Then they sort of more formalized that to, okay, here's the best practices we figured out about telling these LLMs, here's what you say and here's what you're going to get back. So that moved it up to the next level. And that was functions. That's all we had for a while. And people built some really cool stuff with that. But then MCP came along, where now there's a standard protocol for registering the exchange rather than just here's a tool and here's the command you use. And so the MCPs are becoming sort of this next level building block. And then you get these orchestration MCPs, which go even further and know to call other ones in orchestration. And it's starting to get, and this is where vibe coding comes in. I know I had to bring it all the way back to the original topic. So that was that. Fill in if I got anything wrong there.
Well, I want to ask, when we talk about agents, then it sounds more like what we're doing is we're giving AIs agency, the ability to go out and do stuff. Is that kind of where that term agent comes from?
Yes.
That's what it's getting at.
Yes.
Okay.
And the notion of agents and internet agents is not a new one. You know, I have a book behind me that's literally called Internet Agents. It was written in 1996. And it was discussing how do we start building what we would now call a bot. Mm-hmm. But that was where we started getting these notions of code that was semi-independently traversing the internet in search of resources and what it can do with those resources. And over the years, we have created formalized protocols to exchange information. You know, for people who remember what SOAP was like, that was a formalized protocol to enable. Yes, I see Randall. I'm sorry, Randall.
You triggered me there. Stop.
I know it's scary, but these were, you know, previous attempts to formalize and structure how we can locate and bring back structured information. The big deal now is that our structured information doesn't need to be as structured as it once was.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of like we also in the middle there too, past SOAP, there was REST sort of in general. So that we had basically, here's a JSON payload going this way, here's a JSON payload coming back that allows you to have some sort of boundaries and delimiters and ability to decode it and encode on both ends. So if you think of it, MCP and these other A2A protocols that Google released last month are about kind of the next thing of what REST would be replaced with. It's sort of like if we want to talk to something using a much looser sort of set of requests and a set of responses, then what would it look like? So it's kind of at that level.
Things like the agent-to-agent protocol also enable even more independence for our agents. So nowadays, people tend to think of agents as tied to a chatbot. I'm saying something to a chatbot, it's spending a few seconds going and getting the answer, and it's coming back. Increasingly, what we're seeing are people coming up with these much more independent systems that we will give them broad guidelines, and they will kind of live on their own, doing what they want, and every so often sending us a message via other means, sending us a text message, sending us an email saying, oh, by the way, I found out this information for you. Or, oh, by the way, I just booked those concert tickets for you that I figured you would like. Or, you know, things like this. So yeah, we haven't quite gotten to mass adaptation of truly independent agents, but we are starting to see movement in that kind of a direction.
It seems like one of the things that sort of formalizing this protocol could also help you do is put guardrails around what your agent is allowed to do. Yes, you're allowed to make an order from Amazon, but you're not allowed to order $10,000 from Amazon all at once.
Well, and I think this is actually where we start bringing some of it back to FLOSS software, is that it's kind of turning it loose, but it also does mean that people need to exercise that control on their own, because there's no centralized place for doing this. What agents and MCP servers are letting people do is on their own in their chat system say, here's what I want, and kind of letting things turn loose. And if you think of, the very earliest days of open source and kind of the dreams that a lot of those developers were thinking about, they were thinking of open source as an empowering tool, as being able to say, coding is empowering you to command all of these resources, have access to data, do what you want. Now we're kind of saying the same thing, except we're saying you don't need to learn C anymore. You can maybe, and I think this is where we're going to start getting into our vibe coding debate. Maybe you could just issue English language commands and control your agent through natural language. Natural language should also be triggering to you, Randall.
Yes. But the question is, will we end up with a Skynet, or will we end up with an Starship Enterprise computer world? I don't know which of the two this human interface is going to get us to, which direction it could go. Well, we'll probably end up with a Mad Max world before either of those, so we'll see.
Thanks for the optimism there.
Yeah. So I've got a buddy that just this morning he was telling me a story. Now he was using Copilot, not one of the Google products, but he was asking Copilot to look at some code, and Copilot says, "Hey, you've got a memory leak here. It's some C++ code, I think." And he looks at it. He looks at it and goes, "No, Copilot, you have access to this entire code base. This function is a void function. If this function were a Boolean function, then yes, there could be a memory leak because of this. But there's not, and there's no way that it could be, and you should be able to see this." He told me this story just this morning. And it's like, that's sort of where we're at with vibe coding and AI writing code and looking at code. Like, it can be useful sometimes, but it still inherently doesn't actually understand. It doesn't actually have a clue what it's looking at. That's where I'm at with this.
It doesn't. As Randall said earlier, these are really just pattern systems. They're really, really sophisticated pattern systems, but they're just pattern systems. And fortunately, coding also tends to be a pretty good pattern system.
Sure.
But it's not a perfect one.
No.
So it's fairly easy to kind of trick the systems still. Now, that doesn't mean they're not helpful, to a developer, to a programmer, to somebody who's used to code and who is good at, debugging their own code or somebody else's code. It's invaluable, and it really can help steer you in the right direction. But I'm still saying... go ahead, Randy.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say, what I've found in practice over the last month or so playing with these, especially my sort of go-to stack right now has been using Roo code with VS Code and using Gemini 2.5 Flash now for all of my little quick edits, and Gemini 2.5 Pro occasionally when I wanted to architect or just kind of see the overall picture for things. What I've found is that it's sort of helpful in two directions. The one main direction is typing out the boring stuff, the stuff that is just like everybody else has to build for,
the boilerplate,
how to build a data class in Dart, all the boilerplate, all that. It's great at that because there's so many examples of that, and there's so many correct examples of that. That's the key thing. You got to have. Here's the problem. It's taking the average intelligence of everything it reads. Well, I tell you, the average intelligence of most code on GitHub is mediocre. Okay, so that's the best it can kind of do out of the box. But where it also fills in, and this is what I'm also finding very useful, is if I'm drawing a blank about a possibility for something, it's pretty good at just randomly generating things into that space that kind of make it help. And so I think as long as you're using it for these two precise things and aren't just straight out vibe coding, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to say, make it do a box and do the thing over here on the right side. You see, if you're doing that, I think you're going to not get far enough, except accidentally.
Well, I have two thoughts there. One is I really like how you say it kind of randomly fills it in, because that's very much how I feel sometimes about this is, usually I'm trying to do a complicated SQL query or, debug something that already doesn't work, and it gives me a suggestion, and I'll look at it and I'm like, I wouldn't have thought of that, but you know what? Let me give it a try and see if that works. And, it works about 50% of the time.
Yeah.
But I still need to apply a lot of my own thinking to really know that that's, where that 50% is going to be. But we are seeing people who are at least claiming, they can just give in long, detailed instructions in a natural language, and they'll get back some code that mostly works.
Get some code.
Well, they get back to, it mostly works. It works well enough, as a lot of people are saying. And I'm like, okay. But what I'm seeing a lot of people saying is, they're taking their well enough code, which worked great for them. And then when someone says, oh, hey, wouldn't it also be cool if, it could switch between red and blue? And when they go and try to plug that into their description again, they get a completely different program that they don't understand anything about. They don't understand why the whole thing changed.
Yeah. So we have a commenter in our Discord that says something that's also very similar to what I'm thinking about. As you guys are describing this, I'm thinking, oh, so it's like Googling, finding something on Stack Overflow, and then copying and pasting out of Stack Overflow into your program.
Yes.
And XEF6 says he's curious about the thoughts of LLM as a search engine versus LLM as a super intelligent consciousness. I think those are two very parallel thoughts.
So my opinion on that is it is neither. And we need to understand why it is neither. The first is it is not a super intelligent anything. It is not even a non-intelligent. There is no intelligence inside an LLM.
Right.
None whatsoever. Let's be absolutely positively clear about this.
It's autocomplete. It's just autocomplete.
Right. It's a really, really, really good pattern system. And the people behind it thought that if we could understand, and I use understand in a human sense of the word, if we could teach a system language, that we also teach a system intelligence. And what we have found, I think, is that if we have taught a system patterns of language, we have not taught it language, and we certainly have not taught it intelligence. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's also not a search engine. It is, what I find it's really good at is it's good at understanding, and I very much put those in air quotes, what a human has said and turning that into a structure. LLMs are really good at transformations, like transforming natural language into a data structure. Really, really good at that. But it's not good at actually finding knowledge because it doesn't have knowledge. It has sentence patterns. It has word and letter patterns. And we don't know if those are accurate. We don't know if they're inaccurate. We don't know what they are. And it doesn't know and it doesn't care. All it knows is that statistically speaking, certain patterns happen more often than other patterns do. And we have kind of associated that with, that means that certain patterns are more right or more truthful or more accurate than other patterns are. And that's not always true. Certainly when we look at what humans have written over time, we write a lot of things that are wrong. And now those have been incorporated into the large language models as just examples of language.
And one thing I think that's interesting here is that it's also, though, that can we accurately demonstrate that what the LLM is doing with autocompletion and nearby cosine angles and things like that, if that isn't also what our gray matter is doing. It's like maybe this appears to have intelligence because it does mimic in a lot of ways how, like, I don't have the end of my sentence already computed when I start a sentence. So somehow I'm actually auto-completing this sentence I have no idea how I do that, but it's what I do automatically. And I'm just kind of wondering, but then, so what's the limit of what we can compute? Can we compute enough to make it close enough to a human brain? That's what I'm curious
Right,
about.
and I think that's what the data scientists have been assuming. When you talk though to people who have studied things like linguistics and have studied cognitive science and who have studied the human side of this over the years, most of them will say, no, how LLMs work is nothing like how a human thinks, how we approach questions and problem solving. We, humans are wonderful pattern machines as well.
Yeah.
But that's not how we approach a lot of our problem solving and language skills. At least, and I am neither a linguist nor a cognitive scientist. So I don't want to really misrepresent, I don't want to misrepresent them. But that is my understanding from a lot of conversations with both of those professions that I've been able to do over the past several years.
I think we can sort of understand that intuitively as well, just like a really simple thought experiment, and that is there must be more to human consciousness than just language, because there are a few instances of people that, were blind and deaf and therefore had no language, but still had consciousness.
Well,
and much of our consciousness happens in sort of that visual space inside of our head that is not necessarily attached to language until we try to tell somebody about it. So I think just intuitively we can sort of come to that same conclusion.
There are cognitive scientists, however, that would argue, no, people who do not see or do not hear do have, or do not speak, do have a language. It may not be the same language that we would associate with a language, but they do have it. And there are sentence structures and there are linguistic structures that linguists and cognitive science can recognize and identify.
I think at some point we're just, that argument just changes the definition of what language is to match whatever it is that we find, and is therefore not very useful.
That could be, but that would also start including what an LLM is doing.
Yeah,
or could.
It could. So, what practically? How does this work? If someone says, "I want to get started vibe coding," or something that I've thought about that I think makes a lot more sense. You guys make a good point. That's okay. Getting boilerplate written is great. AIs are great for that. Something that I think makes a lot of sense is AI guided fuzzing, where you say, "Hey, I would like for this program to crash." AI, look at the code, give me inputs, and then take the output from the program and feed it back into the AI and say, make it crash. Spin through as many cycles you need to, make it crash. And then, you can keep track of your actual code coverage that way. AI guided fuzzing, I think that is a pretty interesting thing. And there's at least one or two companies out there working on that. But when we take an idea like this, how do we actually put rubber to the road and make it happen?
I think what we're seeing a lot of, and not so much from the automated test generation, because we are seeing companies that are kind of looking at that. But from the code generation point of view, we're seeing companies like Cursor. Cursor is probably the biggest one out there these days, that people are just feeding it descriptions and getting code out of it. Even something as simple as Google now has what they call Canvas as part of their Gemini chat app, which will generate and run code for you. So all of these are, it's those kinds of tools that people are starting to use. You'll also see things like what ChatGPT calls their GPTs, where you're giving it descriptions and possibly some data and turning it loose. The reason why MCP itself was created was so that you could just say as part of a chat system, I've got these MCPs that are out there, use these in particular and go solve this problem. And in a way, that is programming. I mean, sure. I can't say it's not. You're giving instructions and you're logically trying to put together what you want your inputs and outputs to be. And that's programming fundamentally.
Interesting. Yeah.
Related to the show here, since this is mostly about open source and about developers working with open source, there are if I'm writing open source software, I can certainly talk to Gemini. I might have to use a paid backend of some kind for most of what I want to do. But isn't there also models like can't Gemma also be run completely on-prem and
Gemma is can be a
essentially?
completely local model. Yes, Gemma is what Google refers to as an open model. And then, if you have not had this conversation, I'm sure you're going to more and more. What is the difference between an open model and an open source model, and what is
We had some guys from OSI talking about what open source AI means and the debate over that.
yeah.
Not a settled question yet.
It's not,
Yeah.
and it's complicated. It's really taking on a whole new shape. It's requiring it's requiring us to create new definitions. But Gemma is what they refer to as an open model. So you're able to download the model's weights. You're able to modify those weights yourself and tune them as you wish. And you can do additional fine tuning, and that's the way I like to think of fine tuning is giving these models new words, new language, new patterns to help shape how the existing patterns already work. So you're building up a new layer of patterning that is tailored to your needs. And when you do these, or when you adjust the weights, you are skewing it so that it understands. And again, I use that term with air quotes. You better.
Yeah.
Yes. So Gemma is basically providing sort of the core. Here's how English works, or here's how whatever language you're speaking to it in works, and here's some core knowledge. Not a lot. I mean, I can tell you probably how many continents there are on the Earth, and a few other sort of common data, but it's not really a repository of data. Can you use RAGs with Gemma?
You can. The beauty of RAGs is that they're a separate component. They're basically the way I like to think of RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, is that you use your LLM to understand, again, what it is that a person has asked for, and turn that into a data structure of some sort. Once you have it in a data structure, we as developers know what to do with it. We're used to data structures, so we can feed that into a keyword search engine, or feed that into a nearest neighbor algorithm, or do something with it, transform it into another data structure, and then take that data structure, feed it into an LLM again to turn it into something more human-like. So that's really the place where I see LLMs as their biggest use, is that transformation of human to machine, and then machine back into human.
So maybe like if I had a mobile app that had Gemma running on it to kind of interact with me about maybe finding a good place to eat. And so I'm interacting with it, so it's kind of understanding the search parameters. Then it could create a more formalized search request to Google Maps or Yelp or whatever the backends are that it wants to use to provide the real-time accurate data. And then it could repackage that back to me in some sort of format that makes sense, like with my search history and with maybe some notes about the previous time I went there or whatever in terms of a local data store. So Gemma could be that glue in the middle in your device.
Exactly. And the advantage with Gemma is A, it runs locally on your device, but B, we can also teach it new words and new patterns, so that we would be able to teach it things, when we're referring to food specific terms, when we're talking about different kinds of cuisine, we can help it associate the fact that, things like linguine and carbonara and, all of these other specific dishes would be associated with Italian cuisine, or any of a bunch of other words would be associated with other cuisines. And it may not have been trained on those. So we're giving it those additional patterns to think about. Now, that's not giving it the answers. We're not training it with where those restaurants are located or exactly what the names of those restaurants are. But we're training it with a better understanding. And I have to emphasize the air quotes for the audio audience here.
Yeah.
a better understanding of the fact about what, when I'm referring to, when I say, it would be great if I had a really good mozzarella tonight. What does that mean? What should it go looking for? Because if it just did a search for mozzarella, it's not going to find it.
Did you mean mozzarella?
Well, I don't know where you're out west, aren't you?
Yeah, I was central, mid-America.
Yeah. So when I talk about a mozzarella, yes, it's mozzarella, but somebody may not say it that way or type it that way.
Yes.
And that's the training that we may need to give an LLM.
Yep. Doing something like Gemma, if someone really wanted to run it on-prem, what's sort of the system requirements? Is this something you can run literally on your phone? Are we talking about a desktop? Do we need 3 top-end GPUs? Where does that sort of come down?
So, I don't know, Rand, have you played much with Gemma on device?
I haven't. I've seen other people do it, but I haven't done it myself.
We are certainly starting to see the most recent generations of Gemma are able to run on fairly low-level devices. Meta announced with their Llama 4 that it could run on devices that have a single GPU, that it would run on just one GPU and the memory in that GPU, which is really, really impressive. So we're seeing some of these models being able to be shoehorned into the lowest level devices. I haven't tested Gemma itself. On a mobile device. I've tested it on my laptop, which is a Mac from a couple of years ago, and it works really well. The performance on the Mac is really quite good, and I think as we're seeing more and more devices that are being able to handle it, it is almost guaranteed that the next few generations of both Apple's devices and Google's devices will be having dedicated hardware that can handle some of the processing. We're going to start seeing it working better and better on device. We're not going to see the same capabilities that we've seen from, Gemini running on a server somewhere. But we are going to see some impressive stuff. And I think what we may start seeing over time is kind of a division of labor. So that, if it can run it quickly locally, it will. If it has a network, maybe it's going to farm some of the tasks out to the network interface to run it remotely and then process it again locally. So we'll start seeing that split. Maybe some of the more intensive tasks it will try to do remotely if it can. And the easier stuff it'll take care of locally. And there's going to be a lot of software associated with how do we split that up? When do we split that up? What are the questions we can handle locally, and what do we need to handle? What do we need to farm out?
Like say in code editing, you'd probably want auto completions to be done locally and quickly, as opposed to say architecting a new rollout of an app or a new feature for an app that can take time and can be taken time on a server. So you might divide the labor that way, where we do auto completions all in local devices.
Yeah. I talked with Doc Searles on an episode several weeks ago, and he's got this idea that he's been working on and trying to find some people to work with him on it, and that is he calls it personal AI. And it's the idea of I don't care about all the stuff on the internet. I care about my stuff. And so we were talking about this idea of, well, what if we take all of the pictures that I've ever taken and all of the receipts that I have, like scan all my receipts, scan all my bills, and give all of my pictures to this AI that's mine. And we were trying to figure out, like, how would that even work? Would this be built into a NAS that you have sitting on your desk? And that actually seems to be one of the ways that someone could go about trying to build this. But then what ideally you could do is you could then say to your personal AI, hey, I have a charge on my credit card for $85.73. What do you think that's for? And it would have all of that stuff already sucked in and be able to go and say, oh, you went and got, gas the other day at this place. And that's probably what that is. One of the things that comes to mind here is, especially with this idea of running them offline and locally, how close are we to being able to build something like that? What would be involved with building your own personal AI using, say, something like Gemma? And I'm sure a bunch of other open source libraries that you would sort of duct tape together to make that work.
Well, I don't know. This is Your thoughts on this one, Randall? Because I'm curious what you would say on it first.
I think we're close to that. In fact, I think there's already companies advertising having a pendant that you're wearing all the time. No, seriously.
I know there are.
I went by that. I spent it for one. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that way, everything you say around you all gets recorded, and now you've got access to it later in some sort of natural language query. I'm not sure I'd want one of those. And in fact, like I said, I went to the website, and now I'm on their mailing list, so I get annoyed by, we came out with a new version of it. It's prettier now or something. But longer battery life, whatever. And so I'm finding out about advancements that are happening that I am not taking advantage of in my crazy world yet. So I think so. So I think the technology is getting to the point where we could have personal assistants. I'm thinking, is it Jarvis?
Jarvis, from Iron Man.
Yeah, that's sort of like thing you interact with that knows everything that you need to know in the moment and can sort of help you out with that. I think we're getting closer and closer to that, and I think that's also scarier and scarier. It's going to come close to Skynet at some point. Yeah.
Well, but the advantage is if it does become Skynet, it's purely local. You could kill it. As long as you don't,
maybe.
As long as you don't give it access to the network, you're fine. I think we are. I think we're there. To be honest, I think we're there. I think that the biggest challenge really is that we always seem to have this this ebb and flow. We get we started with everything is centralized on the network, and we take advantage of the magnitudes, the opportunities of scale that affords us. But then we get concerned about everything being centralized, so we need to distribute it all and bring it back local. And then we get concerned about the fact that we've got everything local, but we've got no reliable backup or safety mechanism, so we move it out again. And then we get concerned about the privacy, so we move it low. We always have this continuous back and forth.
Yep.
I feel like I've seen this happen good 4 or 5 times now.
Someone once commented that you could set up a tidal wave machine that would actually make energy based on that whoosh back and forth over and over.
Yeah. So, I don't think we have real technological challenges to running things locally. What we do have is the ability to really make that convenient and easy right now.
Yes. Nobody is building it as a product.
Right.
Like
Nobody's building it as an appliance.
Yes.
Because it's not like I don't want to run this on my NAS. I want to buy a box and put it in my house, and I want it to just work.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I used to run my own mail server. There's a reason I outsourced that to Google a long time ago. And I think it's the same sort of thing, is I just want this box sitting there that will just work. And that was kind of why I liked Glass and kind of why I liked Google Assistant, is because they were these things that were getting me there, and they just worked until they didn't. And I feel like
I think if you want a single box in your home that's that smart, you haven't watched enough horror computer films. I mean, Demon Seed comes to mind right away. I mean, things like that. You got to be careful if you're going to have something smart in your home.
But I think, though, this gets back to the other issue that we keep skirting around, and that is vibe coding. Is that, in a sense, I want to be able to have this box that I can just say, oh, I need this software to do this for me right now. Figure out how to do that and do it. And I feel like that's the really, really, really long game when we're talking about vibe coding. And kind of what, again, this ties back to the origins of open source, is empowering everybody to just have this thing that does exactly what you want. And it doesn't matter if nobody else uses it. It doesn't matter. If I've written a program that does exactly what I want it to do, doesn't matter if it meets your need. It doesn't matter if it's 80% complete, because that's the only, I only care about that 80%. If you need something else, you go ask your LLM to do it. I don't care.
One of the things I've been playing with recently is the new streaming stuff. So I think they call it Astra in one format or another.
Yeah.
But being able to have Gemini in real time watch out my camera or on my screen and talk to me about what it's seeing and how it can help me. I think that level of assistant is going to be a lot more interesting to embed than just something where I'm typing at it occasionally, saying something.
Right. And we saw this demo at I/O last year, and Google's been hinting about it in their current crop of glasses. I'm sure we're going to see this again at this year's I/O. This notion that, you could just be wearing a pair of glasses and wandering around and suddenly saying, where did I leave my keys? And your AI, which has been watching you all along, will tell you where your keys are.
So that's very similar. That is very similar to what Microsoft is doing with Recall. And I'm afraid it's going to have the same problem.
Yes.
The thing that killed Recall, and Microsoft's trying to bring it back, and I don't know if they're going to succeed with it or not. The thing that killed it is that people heard what Microsoft were going to do, and they had this visceral reaction of, ooh, I don't want my computer to be taking screenshots of my desktop every 3 seconds. I know what shows up on my desktop. I don't want pictures of that taken, right? It was creepy, and I'm afraid that when you get into the AI stuff in that same vein, people are going to go, "That's a little creepy." Some of us go, "That's really cool," but a lot of people are going to find it as creepy as the Google Glass.
But one of the things I'd like to point out about Google Glass is, 12 years ago, everyone was saying, "Well, I don't know, cameras pointing everywhere are kind of creepy." And I'm like, 12 years on, nobody cares the fact that I'm walking around with cameras pointing everywhere.
Right.
We've gotten past that. 12 years ago, it used to be that when you took a picture on your phone, it needed to make an audible noise. There was legislation to that effect. And nowadays, we just kind of assume people are taking pictures all over the place. What's the attitude going to be like in 12 years? I think what I think about when I think about that, though, is, okay, if I've got something that is recording continuously, what I'm seeing continuously, and it's not taking a snapshot every minute, it's taking, maybe a snapshot every second. What is the data how much data are we now collecting? Most of it will never be used. But how much data am I collecting? How much data do I need to store? And I feel like that's where the notion of storing it all local starts to get a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
Because now we're talking petabytes of data for an indeterminate amount of time.
You're also talking about a lot of CPU or GPU cycles if you don't want to just store them as JPEGs or video, but you want to, turn them into a format that your AI really can natively understand them. Well, it's a lot less storage, but man, that takes a lot of cycles to make that transformation happen.
And that turns into a lot of power.
Yes.
And that's, yes, on one hand, we can distribute that. If you're putting it local, okay, that's now distributed power consumption. But now that's a lot of locally billable distributed power that everyone is suddenly doing. And that's dangerous. That's a bad road to head down.
Sure.
There's also the other meaning of power there, and I actually posted on this on Facebook a couple days ago, which is I wonder if we've hit the knee in the curve with AI, that the amount of power consumed by AI now exceeds blockchain.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be some crossing point at some point, and I don't know if we've hit it there or not yet, but and then somebody was telling me they were running an LLM over blockchain, and I went, it's like, let's just burn all the remaining electrons in the universe.
Big brain move there. Yeah, that's great. AI over blockchain. That is definitely it's a sign of the times that we live in, that those are the two things that they put together. That's great.
I'm curious, Alan, just crystal balling it 5 years from now, maybe. That might be too far. Might be too far. What's your best and worst scenario for 5 years from now?
Driving V8s through the desert.
I'm really not sure I'm the best person to ask about forecasting for the future, because I was the person who, when they saw Glass, said that's the future. And when I saw Google Assistant, I said, that's the future. That's the follow-on from Glass.
Oh, what's the term?
So, maybe I'm not the best person to do prognostication, but what I truly do see that we're going to see these ultra personal devices. What we now think of as a phone, I don't think it will look like a phone in 5 years. The phone's a terrible form factor in a lot of ways. So I think we're going to see, we may call it a phone. It's not going to be a phone. It's going to be voice driven primarily. It may, it probably will have some visual interface, but that won't be the primary interface for it. The user experience for it will be natural, conversational, mostly audible, although not necessarily all audible, and very, very multimodal. So it will be audio when it's appropriate, and video when it's appropriate, and tactile where it's appropriate. We will have multiple ways of input and output, but they will all feel far, far more natural than anything we have today. And that's going to be, AI itself will fall away. It will just be an inherent part of what we're doing. And we won't be thinking of it as this is an AI, this is an LLM. We are using this model. It will just be a core part of the operating system. And we interact with it as we would interact with anything else. It becomes, it kind of goes away, which is where it should.
We've seen that
computers should.
We've seen that with so many bubbles throughout the years. Personal computers was a huge bubble, and then the bubble popped, but everybody's got personal computers. The web, .com bubble was a huge bubble, and it popped, but man, the web has still changed everything. And so you're right; these things, they go away, but they never go away because everything is different afterwards.
Yep.
I think it's inevitably going to be the same with AI. Like we had a lawyer on the show a few weeks back, and we were talking about some of the legal questions with AI.
Oh my goodness!
And his opinion was it doesn't matter. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. It does not matter what the courts say. You cannot put the genie back into the bottle, and they will eventually have to come to that conclusion. Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. So you've got an open source library. I was trying to guess what it was about and get you to plug it. What is LangChain AI and LangChain JS? What is all this about?
So LangChain, it's not my library. I am a tiny contributor to it.
Gotcha.
But that's very much the nature of open source, right?
Yes.
Is you've got many hands make light work. Mm-hmm. So LangChain was kind of one of the early libraries that was out there that was helping developers use some of these AI tools and tap into AI tools. Mm-hmm. One of the first things they were one of the first companies. It's run by a company called LangChain, the project. But the project was one of the first ones to say, look, if you're using OpenAI's model, or if you're using Perplexity's model, or if you're using any of these models, doesn't matter. They're providing their API. We're going to provide an abstracted API for you to use. Mm. And then as part of that abstraction, we're going to come up with this concept called chains. So that you're essentially, you're taking your input and you're passing it through stages, one after the other. And one of those stages is sending it through an LLM, whereas other stages may just be things like taking the input from a human and combining it with a template. And other ones may be taking the output from the LLM and extracting chunks from it. And other ones may be, combining it with a data store, or sending this to a vector database or whatever. So it has these abstractions that you could put together in chains, hence the name, LangChain. Over time, it's really grown. And it was one of the first ones, for example, to illustrate the concepts of what we would now call tool calling or function calling before the LLMs implemented that feature themselves. It implemented structured outputs. It found ways to kind of convince the LLMs to structure things and use them before the LLMs had built in as a feature. It was used to illustrate what we would now call thinking models or reasoning models before the models did it themselves. And now it was the one that really started introducing the notion of React agents and had built-in modules to do that before the models started getting agentic and before everyone else started coming up with agentic libraries. LangChain was the first ones to do that. It then spun off another project called LangGraph, which takes a very, very computer science notion of a directed cyclic graph and structures it in a way that makes it useful for agent building. My involvement with it is this teeny tiny part of the whole thing that basically is the compatibility layer for Google's Gemini and parts of Google's Gemma. So if you're using it to talk to Gemini or using it to talk to Google's Vertex platform, that's my code. That's been my involvement all along. And it's significant. It's a significant chunk of code. But what's great about it, and one of the things that I like about it in working with FLOSS is talking to people who have different perspectives than I do, and being able to learn how to negotiate. Well, what's the right approach to this? Here's how one system does it. Here's how another system does it. What's the right abstraction? Can we find a right? Is there a right abstraction? What's the right way to do this? And how do we build our very different libraries so that they all at least appear to work the same to other developers? How do we write tests? How do we write documentation? How do we help people understand this? How do we write those articles? Everything that goes into really, really good open libraries and systems. That's been a tremendous learning opportunity for me and why I love participating with this project.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. How do you write test cases for AI? Like what does that even look like?
That's really, oddly enough, it's really, really tough.
Yeah.
A lot of what you do, because these are non-deterministic systems. If I give it a problem, if I ask it a question, the answer it gives me tomorrow is different than the one it gave me yesterday.
I was doing some reading about that particular problem. So apparently a lot of AI, I forget the term that they use. There's a term. It's a knob inside the AI for temperature, maybe.
Right. So,
yeah. Right. And so if you turn the temperature like all the way to 0, it's supposed to give you the same answer every time. And it turns out it's supposed to. Like theoretically it's supposed to. But it turns out that many AI models are just incapable of doing that. Because the data, the source essentially comes off the disk in non-deterministic speeds. And so those bits of back-end code get loaded into different places in the RAM, and you get non-determinism out of that. And all that fascinated me to read about that so very much.
What's even worse, though, is in some cases, when you're doing things like you want to test the temperature knob to see if it works, to see if you've sent it correctly, one of the most interesting things I've seen are people discussing how to test the output is to say, well, what you do then is you take the input, you take the output, feed that into an LLM and say, did this answer the question? And that's to me, a very strange approach.
It's that's kind of a scary,
isn't it? But
yeah,
the data scientists are telling me that there's solid math behind doing this. But it's kind of scary to say.
LLMs, as I'm vibe coding, LLMs do act as if I can do meta conversations with them about what they did. And I appreciate that, and I take advantage of that all the time. Of course, I'm also the same guy who says please and thank you when they get the right answer. I'm a little weird that way too. So.
A story about that one. When I first started doing demonstrations with Google Assistant, it was not, some of my code was not working well. It wasn't hearing me correctly, and when it did work, I would say thank you. I had an audience member ask me, when you say thank you, is that reinforcement training? That it got it right, and I'm like, no, it is in no way that smart. And they're still not. In fact, the head of OpenAI recently said that people saying please and thank you it's millions of dollars worth of energy going into handling please and thank you.
That's hilarious.
Well, I've learned it for my my phone device here, which I won't mention the name of the lady that would respond to it from my phone here, but and don't say it out loud because we can't. Oh no, it's only going in my ears, so it's safe. So I get worried sometimes when I'm on a call if somebody's going to trigger my phone or not. Usually I turn my phone upside down, but I've learned to say thank you at the end because it stops it listening. And so it's been a positive feedback to me to do that every time. So because otherwise, if I don't finish the conversation, it continues to listen to me maybe playing a videotape or something. Videotape? What the hell's those? I'm dating myself. No, wait. I'm not just dating myself. I'm carbon dating myself. So anyway, but when I'm playing a video, those words will end up in the onboard device if I don't say thank you at the end of my conversation with the device. So I have learned to say thank you. It is crazy.
Yeah. So you were talking about LLMs, testing LLMs. We've got a question in the chat room actually that goes along with this. And it also reminded me of something that I've heard about, and I think maybe all these three are kind of tied together, and that is the idea that LLMs, sometimes, there's been some instances of this, where like they'll get the right answer, but they do it in a way that nobody understands how they did it. Like they didn't do it the right way, but somehow managed to come up with the right answer. This idea of an LLM testing another LLM, the thing I would be afraid of is the test LLM would start saying, yes, that is correct, it gave you the right answer, but a human will look at it and go, no, not at all, right? And then the question the mashed potato has is, what happens when AI starts ingesting other AI slop? And I think all three of those sort of fit together. Like, what does that world look like when we run out of human stuff that we've made and we start doing training with?
We already have. We already have. They've already been announcing that we kind of have pretty much consumed all of the human-produced output out there already.
I heard somebody
in one form or another.
I heard somebody talking about like simulated training data or something really weird sounding like that. That apparently it's what they do when they run out of human stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Once again, the data scientists tell me that the simulated data is actually good. I don't quite understand it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But they tell me it's okay. Yeah. The bigger problem is that when we see there was some research that was done, I feel like it was about a year and a half ago now at this point, that was saying that when you overtrained the AI on generated data, increasing generations got worse and worse. We saw clear regressions in their understanding, again the air quotes, of the content, and especially in their generation of content. And that kind of makes sense because, again, you're now reinforcing it. You're overtraining it on certain patterns. And those patterns are not necessarily the best patterns.
Yeah, you kind of have to figure that when an AI produces something, it puts patterns in there that maybe we as humans don't pick up on, but other AI does pick up on those patterns. I guess that's kind of the thread that ties all that together.
That's some of that. And I think some of what we're also seeing is the various companies are working on ways on how you can identify AI-generated works. And the way they're doing that is by skewing the probabilities of what gets generated. It is one of the content ID techniques that are out there. And then, of course, you get people saying things like, oh, the M dash. If you see too many M dashes, that's clearly a ChatGPT thing. Whether that's true or not,
I like using dashes in my writing.
M dashes, yeah.
Well, are we sure that you're not an LLM? I mean,
Yeah.
So
I'm an avatar.
So
works out.
that is one thing that I've taken quite a strong stand on. None of my work that you ever read or see anywhere is AI generated at all. And because of the things that I do, that's sort of a stand that I've had to take. So you can, if you believe that I am actually here and the one talking to you, then there you go.
Are we absolutely sure?
Are we absolutely sure? Anyway, wow. So you've got a podcast that
yes.
you want to plug real quick, and it sounds pretty interesting. What is your podcast, and what's it about?
So it is the Two Voice Devs, DEVS, short for developers, Two Voice Devs podcast.
Yeah.
Where my co-host Mark Tucker and I, or one of us and a guest host will come on, and we will be talking about pretty much what's going on in the AI world. We started about coming up on 5 years ago now, where we were mostly helping developers understand how to create good user experiences with Alexa and Google Assistant. And now we've kind of, like everyone else, we've moved into the AI world, but we're kind of seeing it come around full circle, that the new Alexa and the new Google Assistant under the name Gemini are these AI systems at heart. So we're helping developers, and we are very much a developer show, understand how we can build with AI, how we use these AI tools or how we use AI interfaces to help us really kind of meet the needs of people to be understood better, how we can deliver better products using this new UX paradigm. You can find us on YouTube, your favorite podcast location, or follow me on LinkedIn. Great ways to follow me, and I post when we have a new episode.
Yeah. And what is prisoner.com and spiders.com?
So spiders.com is the company that I work for, Objective Consulting. We're a small consulting shop. We mostly help our clients understand how to use this new technology. And it's, how do you, when we say this new technology, we mean this new technology for the past 25 years. So, when a client comes to us and says, what is this voice thing? Or what is this web thing? We've been there to help them kind of understand it and build and deploy in these new environments. Prisoner.com is my personal domain, and you can find links to wherever I am, the blogs that I'm posting, the stuff that I'm posting. You can find everything from prisoner.com.
Perfect. We appreciate you being here and putting up with my dumb questions about AI. And
there aren't, one of the things I like to point out is we're all learning this stuff. Even people who are experts in this field are learning new stuff all the time. So they're really, more than ever, there are no dumb questions. There's stuff that we're all trying to figure out.
You know what I've discovered is a superpower? Being willing to ask dumb questions. It is a superpower. How many times I've gotten myself in trouble by thinking, I would love to ask this question, but somebody's going to think I'm dumb or don't know what I'm talking about if I ask. Just ask the dang question. You'll learn way more about it by asking the questions rather than trying to sit there and try to look smart. Asking dumb questions is a superpower, and I learned so much on this show particularly, but just in general by being willing to look a little dumb and figure out what's actually
agree.
Going on.
Same thing on my podcast is, I'll have a guest host on and they're saying something. I'm like, say that again for me slowly, because I didn't get it the first 3 times.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. Yes, very much so. Did I say your name right? Is it Firstenberg? Is
you got it.
All right, Allen Firstenberg. Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, Randal, what do you think?
Wow. So we didn't talk much about vibe coding, but I think we got the point across pretty clearly in the middle of that. I'm glad for the other stuff that we filled in, though. I mean, it's good to get kind of like the background, and of course, Alan spends a lot more time heads down with that stuff. I'm sort of looking at it only from the perspective of how do I put it on a mobile device and how do I drop it into my Flutter app, because that's my audience, my GE audience that I'm speaking to. But I've had a personal fascination for this for decades, because I remember the first Markov chains, which became the sort of theory for all the auto-completion stuff going on, and how a lot of the early Markov stuff was done in Perl, because it was like two strings next to each other and see what their correlations are. Hey, sounds exactly like what a Perl associative array is, huh? All right, yeah, exactly. What I've always had a sense of, and I was calling this 30 years ago, was that in order for us to get smarter systems, in things that did more than what programmers were able to achieve traditionally, we would have to ultimately create a system that we couldn't debug by single-stepping it. And I want to explain that very carefully. When we write normal code, we can pull up the debugger and go step, 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 and kind of see where it finally went off the rails. We can't do that with an LLM. It's become so complex that there is no equivalent to single stepping, actually doing one thing at a time.
You can single step it, but the data that's in there is just totally incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's an intermediate stage. It's almost as if it's been translated across multiple dimensions into some foreign thing.
Right.
Then that foreign thing gets manipulated and then brought back to reality, and oh, it's a flower.
Yes.
That kind of thing. But it was like I called this 30 years ago. I said, in order for us to get smarter, we're going to have to write code that we don't understand, and can't single step to fix it. We have to fix it with other means, and we've done that. And I kind of wonder then what the next generation of that kind of major breakthrough is going to be. Is it going to be just more in terms of making neural nets do better things? I mean, neural nets are great. Neural nets help us then do the LLM autocompletion stuff, the cosine calculations, stuff like that, to make that all work, vector space, all the fun stuff that I've only just barely learned the terms to, but it's great because I know that's all in there somewhere. So I wonder what the next revolution is, and I haven't had any thoughts on that yet. So that's kind of I called this 30 years ago, but I'm not calling right now what I think 30 years is going to be. So I'm still waiting to kind of see what when that ship's going to sail, if ever.
When you figure it out, let us know.
Yeah, I'm enjoying all this. I'm enjoying the vibe coding. I've been updating my website, and I found I watch probably 15, 20 AI videos a day at least of people that are doing vibe coding or doing cool things with LLMs, and it's just moving so quickly that it's like if I had a 40-hour-a-week job, I probably couldn't keep up with all this. So it's probably good that I'm between gigs right now, but I would rather have a gig, by the way. But I'm between gigs right now. My banker doesn't think so. My banker wants me to have a gig. But at least I have time to kind of be heads down in this stuff and have time to play with it and figure out where I'm going next with it. And I can't wait to see where we are in 6 months, where we are in a year. I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, very cool. You want to plug that thing you do on Wednesdays and anything else?
Sure. So I am a Flutter Google developer expert. I'm one of the 11 in the U.S. and about 150 in the country, or in the world, I mean. And one of the things that involves me doing is doing outreach, which means I'm doing, I'm trying to answer questions on Discord and Stack Overflow and Reddit and anywhere else I kind of see them. I keep thinking Foursquare belongs on the list, but Foursquare has nothing to do with any of those things. So, yeah, I'm answering questions about locations and how they relate to Flutter. No, I don't think that's going to work. And we do this Wednesday show every week. Called Hump Day Q&A AMA. And so we get experts like Simon Lightfoot, who's a really smart guy in the Flutter area. He actually answers most of the questions. I'm mostly color commentary, so that's the fun part. I manage the question flow on the show because it's a live call-in show. We do that every Wednesday. That's pretty cool. I also have a YouTube channel. I'll leave you in the show notes for that. That's about Dart and Flutter if you're interested in that sort of stuff. I'm also I just bought not a Steadicam. What do they call these? Gyrocam mount for my phone. So I'm probably going to be doing more walking selfies for fun, and that will be in my personal channel though, not my YouTube, not my professional channel.
Yeah,
but
cool.
yeah. So
all right,
I'm working on.
Appreciate it. Thank you for being here, man. For jumping in kind of last minute. Thanks. All right.
Always.
If you want to find my stuff, of course, at Hackaday, we've got the security column, goes live on Fridays, and we sure appreciate Hackaday being the home of Floss Weekly. There's also the Untitled Linux Show, that other podcast I do. That's over at twit.tv/ULS. Record there on Saturday afternoon. And you can find it the edited, the for consumer, for consumption, that goes live usually Sunday or Monday. And we have a lot of fun with that. So feel free to follow me over there. We appreciate everybody that watches and listens, both those who get us live and on the download. And we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.